Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 16th of April 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me today in the studio, Patrick Henningsen from 21st Century Wire. Welcome to the programme, Patrick.
Great to be with you, Mike.
So they've gone and done it.
They have indeed.
What can we say? Well, let's start with Theresa May's excuses. Let's hear a little bit of this.
While this action is specifically about deterring the Syrian regime, it will also send a clear signal to anyone else who believes they can use chemical weapons with impunity. There is no graver decision for a Prime Minister than to commit our forces to combat. And this is the first time that I have had to do so. As always, they have served our country with the greatest professionalism and bravery, and we owe them a huge debt of gratitude. We would have preferred an alternative path, but on this occasion there is none. We cannot allow the use of chemical weapons to become normalised, either within Syria, on the streets of the UK, or elsewhere. We must reinstate the global consensus that chemical weapons cannot be used. This action is absolutely in Britain's national interest. The lesson of history is that when the global rules and standards that keep us safe come under threat, we must take a stand and defend them. That is what our country has always done, and that is what we will continue to do.
So I don't even know where to begin with that, Patrick. We have bombed a sovereign country. We've done so because, in Theresa May's opinion, that was in Britain's national interest. We haven't done that because anybody was, or to support international law. We've done that because of international norms and international rules, and the fact that the way that Theresa May wants things to be, that she's decided that the best way to deal with that is to bomb. And she would have preferred an alternative path, but she claims that there was no other alternative path. This is incredible. She said that she's done this because someone has used chemical weapons. And so my question is, who has used chemical weapons? And she seems to think or assume that it's the Assad regime. And my question to Theresa May and the British government, the US government and the French is, how do you know that? How do you know that? Is this not like a repeat of the Salisbury incident? You didn't know then when it took place, and you still don't know in terms of the Novichok conspiracy. So I see a very disturbing pattern of behavior here, Mike. Right. Now, the government put out a statement following the weekend, and I want to go through a couple of these points because it's important. They say the action we've taken with our American and French allies is limited, targeted, and essential to degrade Assad's chemical weapons capability. I'm not aware that we have any evidence that Assad had a chemical weapons capability. And so, first question is, how did they choose their targets? Well, they said this is based on intelligence. They somehow had intelligence that there was a chemical weapons stockpile manufacturing facility in Barzeh on the outskirts of Damascus, and they've been holding this as secret information, Mike, for quite some time. So my first question is, and this is a common sense question, so forgive me, anybody in the government who's listening, but if you had that intelligence, why not hand that over to the OPCW? Why not respect the CWC? Hand that information to the international bodies so that they can investigate. Because after all, the OPCW have permanent members of their teams stationed in Damascus following the destruction of Syria's chemical weapons arsenal in 2013 and 14. So wouldn't it make sense to give them a call and say, hey guys, you might want to go check this building out? But they didn't do that. Instead, they claiming they had intelligence. My answer to that, Mike, is that wasn't a chemical weapons facility, and we have reports already from the ground. Damascus was in fact working on pharmaceuticals and other things that these buildings were used for, including education, Mike. So we have the government using the OPCW under certain circumstances when it doesn't really suit them so much. It doesn't matter, we don't need the OPCW. We'll find that this is a theme. This is a theme. She said, the government statement said, it's not about regime change or intervening in a civil war. well, it can't be about intervening in a civil war because it's not a civil war, Patrick, correct? It says it's about alleviating further humanitarian suffering and strengthening the international norm. There it is again. We're not talking about international law. We're talking about international norms prohibiting the use of chemical weapons. The action was agreed by the cabinet. So again, when it suits Theresa May, we'll make this point once again, when it suits her, we live in a parliament with parliamentary sovereignty, in a parliamentary democracy. When it doesn't suit her, we don't live with parliamentary sovereignty in a parliamentary democracy, and Parliament can be sidelined. So there you go. Based on the regime's persistent pattern of behaviour and the cumulative analysis of specific incidents, we judge it highly likely both that the Syrian regime has continued to use chemical weapons and will continue to do so. And the main point in this is, why did they go ahead and take the action between the tripartite action? Because they say here, Russia would just have vetoed us in the Security Council. Now, we're going to come on to that in a second.
I just want to add, the U.S. has claimed that their intelligence for this event, their certainty, their highly likely estimate that the Syrian government carried out a chemical attack last Saturday was that they have social media or open source intelligence to confirm that. Open source intelligence is really social media. So apparently they've been looking on the internet, and they're convinced, based on what they found on the internet, that the Assad regime perpetrated a massive chemical attack in Douma. And so it's war by social media. So as we said on last night's Sunday Wire, I think instead of NATO, we can replace NATO, Mike, maybe with the YouTube Defense Force. So upload videos to YouTube, and then the new YouTube Defense Force, which is the US, the UK, and France, can fly around wherever they find these videos taking place and strike immediately without waiting for UN approval. Do you think this could be a good idea, I think, going forward, Mike?
Okay, well, let's have a look at the international response. Vladimir Putin said that this was an act of aggression against a sovereign state. He said just as 1 year ago, when the airbase in Syria came under attack, that was on the 7th of April a year ago, the US used as a pretext a staged chemical attack against civilians, this time in Douma, a Damascus suburb. And he said, in a sign of cynical disdain, a group of Western countries decided to take military action without waiting for the results of the investigation. Russia condemns in the strongest possible terms the attack in Syria. He said the current escalation around Syria is destructive for the entire system of international relations. History will set things right, and Washington already bears a heavy responsibility for the bloody outrage in Yugoslavia, Iraq, and Libya, and adding Syria to that as well. Now, he spoke to Rouhani in Iran yesterday. And according to his website, the president stated that the illegitimate action has seriously damaged the prospects of political settlement in Syria. Putin, in particular, the statement said, emphasized that if any such actions continue in violation of the UN Charter, this will inevitably lead to chaos in international relations. So again, some pretty unequivocal statements here. But then the backlash in the United Nations Security Council arrived as well. Russia and China rejected this unilateral mission, this unilateral strike. Russia presented a resolution which condemned the aggression against the Syrian Arab Republic by the United States and its allies, which violates international law and the UN Charter. They demanded that all such aggression is halted immediately and without delay, and to not be repeated. They said that this was an act of hooliganism in the international arena, and I think that's absolutely right. Now, on screen at the moment, we have the absolutely lovely Karen Pierce, who is Britain's permanent representative to the United Nations Security Council. What was she saying? Well, of course, she was promoting the responsibility to protect doctrine, along with Nikki Haley. But they carried out this attack because everyone knows that Assad carries out chemical weapons attacks regularly. So that was the basis of her argument, Patrick, everyone knows.
Really? Well, a couple of years ago, I guess you could say, if you're a mainstream defender of the party line, you would say, well, everybody knows that Tony Blair and George Bush didn't collude in advance to attack Iraq. Everybody knows. Well, they knew until the Chilcot report came out, and now everybody knows that that wasn't the case. And I think you'll see in this situation, Mike, the evidence will bear out and really make, to say it lightly, a laughingstock of Karen Pierce, Treason May, and just about everybody else who's been parroting this conspiracy theory so far. We'll see.
But it was left to the ambassador for Bolivia to really hit the nail on the head. So let's have a listen to this, and we'll talk about it in a second.
The use of chemical weapons or chemical substances as weapons, as this is unjustifiable and criminal wherever it happens, by whomever. Their use is a serious crime against international law, international peace and security. Those responsible for committing such terrible and criminal acts must be identified, investigated, prosecuted, and punished in the most rigorous way possible. Bolivia continues to demand a transparent and impartial investigation to determine who are the culprits. But in addition to that, as the topic of this meeting is the fact that 3 permanent members of the Council, as I said, have used force in breach of the United Nations Charter. You cannot combat the alleged violation of international law by violating international law. Bolivia is surprised by the fact that the permanent members of the Council, given that they have a greater responsibility for maintaining international peace and security, have decided to bypass the United Nations when it suits them. They defend multilateralism as long as it serves them, and then they simply discard it. When it is no longer in their interest, they're no longer attached to multilateralism.
So parliamentary sovereignty, just push that aside when we don't need it. United Nations, we don't need it, just push it aside. We have 3 nation states on this planet that are in the control of criminals, and they have committed criminal acts under international law, have they not?
Sure. Yeah, a run around Parliament, no problem. A run around Congress, no problem. A run around international law, no problem there. And by the way, while we're at it, let's just undermine the UN Security Council, because 3 permanent members don't like the decision of that body, so they're going to then go and act on their own. And then they're going to lecture the Council only a few days later about how Syria and Russia are not respecting international law. This Karen Pierce and others and Nikki Haley. This is beyond hypocrisy, Mike. This is a whole new category that begs a definition.
Yeah.
So we ask our readers at the UK, Colin, please come up with a definition higher than hypocrisy to describe this situation, please. We'd really appreciate it.
He went on to say, it happens that the empires believe themselves morally superior to the rest of the world. They think they're exceptional, and they think they're indispensable, and therefore they think they're above the law, that they're above the international law. It is amazing that it comes to the representative for a country like Bolivia to tell the truth in this way. So, is Bolivia going to be next on the list?
I guess Bolivia is not part of the international community, according to what we've heard from the French, the British, and the Americans. They said the international community is behind them. But I guess South America, Africa, Asia, China, forget about China, Russia, forget about them. So I guess the international community, Mike, is what? NATO. Is that the international community?
Not even anymore. NATO's sidelined as well.
Well, Germany's not throwing massive support behind this illegal police action by the United States, Britain, and France. So it's less than NATO.
Absolutely. So we'll come back to the UK then and look at the response from the opposition party and the opposition leader. Jeremy Corbyn began by sending this letter to Theresa May. He said, I believe the action was legally questionable. And this morning, the UN General Secretary said as much, reiterating that all countries must act in line with the UN Charter. You assured me, he said, that the Attorney General had given clear legal advice approving the action. I would therefore be grateful if you would publish this advice in full today, which of course she didn't. given that neither the UN nor the OPCW has yet fully investigated, it's clear that diplomatic and non-military means have not been fully exhausted. Isn't this a prerequisite for a military action in international, usually following international norms, as she likes to call it?
Following international law and following the UN Charter, actually. So what the British and the French and the Americans do is making up a new sort of what Emmanuel Macron calls a legal framework. So this is basically doing the Tony Blair method, which is make it up as you go along.
Yeah. So Corbyn went on to call for the OPCW inspectors to get the opportunity to do their work. He said that Britain should be acting through the UN, should be pursuing diplomatic means. In fact, it should be leading the diplomatic effort, he said, and should be engaging with all parties, including Saudi Arabia and Israel, everybody that has any interest in this, to reach a settlement. He followed up with an article in The Guardian, Diplomacy and Not Bombing is the way to end Syria's agony, and he was also appearing on the Andrew Marr programme yesterday, on BBC One, and he questioned the legal basis once again for the airstrikes. He said that the humanitarian justification was legally debatable, and he called for a War Powers Act, which would require the government to get approval from Parliament before taking any future military action. So Corbyn taking a stand on this, and well, what will we see? Some more allegations of Labour Party anti-Semitism in the next couple of days and weeks?
Isn't it interesting, Mike, the timing of Rupert Murdoch, the Israeli lobby, and the Tory party's attack on Corbyn, which was timed right before the bombings, this trope which is anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, that was designed to, clearly, by the looks of this, designed to sideline Corbyn in advance of this bombing run, because they knew Jeremy Corbyn could mount a significant opposition in advance and possibly drum up enough public support to demand some sort of parliamentary overview of this decision. So I think that's not a coincidence at all. But what I was impressed with, Mike, was watching Corbyn on Andrew Marr this weekend. He looked very focused and very clear on this issue, and I did see a statesman there, Mike. Something that a lot of people have remarked that they don't see with Theresa May.
So this evening at 5:30 in Parliament Square, there is a protest taking place, and well, anybody that would like to go to that and send us any photos or video, please do so. We're very, very keen to cover this. I'm quite sure the mainstream media isn't going to cover very much at all. Now, look, Patrick, what I want to do now is to turn to the media coverage of this over the weekend, and I'm going to start with this BBC video. This appeared on the BBC website. Now, there's some section of this for people that are listening audio only. There are a few sections in this which don't contain speech, but stick with it, and you'll get what I'm talking about when we discuss it at the end.
The purpose of our actions tonight is to establish a strong deterrent against the production, spread, and use of chemical weapons.
What we're hearing here is the sound of airstrikes, almost rumbling sort of sound. That sounds like thunder in the distance.
We are confident that all of our missiles reach their targets.
Le régime de Bachar el-Assad savait à quoi il s'exposait en employant une nouvelle fois ses armes odieuses contre son peuple.
It was a limited, targeted and effective strike with clear boundaries that expressly sought to avoid escalation.
Right now, this is a one-time shot, and I believe that it sent a very strong message.
Was that not the most egregious piece of propaganda you've ever seen, Patrick?
The first thing I want to make a comment that no, we don't believe that James Mattis was actually drunk during that speech. He just has a natural slurring of the speech. I just want to make that clear to everybody. Donald Trump said this was a perfect strike, Mike, but we're seeing many reports in the media internationally that, in fact, up to as high as 72 cruise missiles were downed by anti-aircraft defense and by electronic means. So out of 120 or something like that, so around a 50% hit rate. Would you call that perfect?
If I remember in last year's attack, it was a similar story. So it's a bit unfortunate that in that piece of propaganda there, the BBC failed to mention that little fact. That should have been surely something that was reported. No?
And just quickly, what's more, Syrian did this with 1980s and 1970s anti-aircraft Soviet era books and S-200s and other sort of antiquated systems. So they managed to bring down half of the righteous power of Britain, the US, and France, of their latest technologies or whatever, with 1970s and 80s Soviet technologies. They didn't use any of the top of the range stuff because I think Syria and Russia knew that part of the reason for this was to test the air defenses, Mike. So they're not going to probably use S-3 and 400 missile defense systems for not wanting to give too much away in terms of air defense. And certainly Israel's very interested in this altercation because Israel itself will be measuring and carefully calculating what Syria's air defense capabilities are.
But getting back to the BBC video itself, the second half of it, suddenly the music changed to war drums,
snare drums,
the military snare drum, and suddenly Donald Trump, who is probably the most vilified and hated political figure in the history of the BBC, suddenly becomes a great friend. It is incredible.
A military leader. So this is propaganda. They talk about, I'm forever hearing, Mike, people in British government, especially on the Tory side, in the United States, on both parties, saying that RT's propaganda, Russians' propaganda. What exactly do you call that segment by the BBC? I think we need to look at the propaganda that we're producing in the West, which I think I would argue by orders of magnitude is on a far greater scale than anything that RT could manage to produce if they even wanted to.
Now, this morning on the Today programme at Radio 4, Professor Piers Robinson was due to, or had been invited onto the programme, until late last night when he got a message saying, well, unfortunately, because he's in Berlin at the moment, unfortunately we cannot get anybody to meet and greet you at the BBC studios in Berlin. So they got somebody else on instead. They clearly didn't want to have him on. But in the segment, Patrick, in the segment that they had intended to have him on to introduce that, Martha Carney was setting the scene, and this is how she went about it.
It's 26 minutes to 8. As the military conflict in Syria continues to claim lives and drive people from their homes, there's another more shadowy war underway, a propaganda battle. The Russian government has been pumping out attacks against the White Helmets, a group of humanitarian volunteers. They carry out rescue operations in areas where emergency services can no longer operate and send videos outside Syria using helmet and handheld cameras. But in these information wars, Russia claims that the White Helmets fake attacks. Ammar al-Salmo, manager of the Syria Civil Defence Group, also known as the White Helmet, denies these claims.
So they then went on to have a little interview with Ammar al-Salmo, which is really unfortunate, Patrick, because, well, this is him.
Oh, that's inconvenient. It looks like he's a member of either Ahrar al-Sham or Jabhat al-Nusra or Nur al-Din Ziki, one of the al-Qaeda terrorist affiliates operating there around East Aleppo. There he is, Mike. He's one of the more prominent members of the White Helmets and apparently a good friend of the BBC.
Absolutely. He is certainly the expert that they go to, but there he is, armed amongst a group of armed men, as you say.
At least he's shaved for the photo, Mike, which is...
Well, he didn't shave for this one. And of course, this is a very famous video clip which the White Helmets put out. You remember this one quite well.
Well, here he is with his camera ready, and he just so happened to be at the location of the alleged strike on a UN aid convoy. If you remember, this was all the rage back in September 2016, and this, of course, was blamed on the Russians and the Syrians that they hit a UN aid convoy, and this was right as there was a peace negotiations taking place, and of course this scuppered the whole effort. And as if by magic, Mike, you find the white helmets are always there at the opportune time with their cameras. Whatever's going on around, in the case of Trump's announcement 2 weeks ago of pulling troops out of Syria, and all of a sudden there's the white helmets with a supposed chemical attack to scupper the whole thing and change the course of U.S. policy. Aren't they incredible and uncanny with their timing, Mike? I always find it amazing.
But the BBC happy to use terrorists as experts. This is fantastic stuff. And it doesn't end there. The Times, Patrick, well, we seem to have a new banner.
There she is. This is the new, so they've managed to manufacture a banner character for this so-called chemical weapons incident from last Saturday. And here she is. Her name is Massa. And there she is with her mother. And I'm sure she will be on Twitter in a very short time. 7 years old, she'll probably be managing a Twitter account, and I suppose J.K. Rowling is probably in the background getting ready to sign her for a book deal and put her on tour in America with any luck. So there's the narrative. And here's the Sunday Times for anybody that's interested. I mean, this is extraordinary, Mike. You know what else is extraordinary? This is an exclusive, by the way. They're saying there's 3,000 survivors of the chemical attack that somehow made it to a refugee camp already in northern Syria and already being courted by the Western press. I can't imagine that this was organized in advance, but 3,000 survivors. That's interesting, Mike. So apparently there are 3,000 victims or survivors or potential victims of this chemical attack. It seems to grow by the day, but you wouldn't ever suspect the Times of doing anything that's even remotely propagandistic, would you?
No, you wouldn't. Nor the Express. And in fact, this story, although it's the Express that I've put up here, headline is Syria attack, British submarine hunted by Russian subs in deadly cat and mouse game. Although that is their headline, the Sunday Express got this from the Times apparently. So this is more Murdoch dross. So this is a fantastic article. Apparently, a Royal Navy submarine heading towards Syria has been hunted by up to 2 deadly Russian subs and a number of other vessels in the Mediterranean for days as tensions between the countries ratchet up. The British crew found themselves involved in a cat and mouse game with at least one of the Kremlin Kilo-class subs dubbed the Black Hole because they're so stealthy. 2 frigates and an anti-submarine aircraft were also involved in the hunt, the Sunday Times reported. The Tomahawk missile-equipped British vessel had been moving to within range of Syria when it found itself under threat. It then spent days trying to avoid detection by the Russian force. And they go on to say the Kilo-class submarines among the deadliest in Putin's arsenal, powered by 2 diesel generators and an electric drive. They can move silently underwater at speeds of up to 17 knots. They can be equipped with a range of deadly weapons, including cruise and anti-ship missiles. And they say that following this tension-filled encounter, the British Astute-class submarine did not take part in the attack on Syrian chemical weapons facilities. Well, I consider if there's even an ounce of truth in this, then the Russians, that is a win for them, absolutely, because they prevented a British nuclear submarine from taking part in this. And of course, they did it with their Kilo-class diesel-electric submarines, which are absolutely as stealthy as it gets. But nonetheless, the way that this article is spun is the most obscene piece of propaganda. But I think it gets better, Patrick, doesn't it?
It does.
Because here is CNN. And apparently, well, I don't even know, you better describe this because
CNN's investigating the chemical attack. They've gone to the refugee camp, and Arwa Damon, their star reporter, is smelling the clothes. Can you go back and play that beginning part of that clip?
I can, yes.
Yeah, she's smelling the clothes of the survivors, and she smells chlorine. This is the level of the CNN investigation. There she goes. She's all, oh my God, it smells like chlorine.
Just as well it wasn't Novichok, Patrick.
Sure. So there's Arwa Damon here. So this is how the case is being prosecuted in the media. So they're creating the sort of after, and they're getting the kids putting on surgical masks there. So it's all good for the American viewers. This passes as news in the United States, unfortunately. But that's CNN. That reporter, well, she's interesting, Mike, because she went on a drunken tirade in Baghdad recently, or I think it was last year or the year before, and she was so drunk and in public, and the EMTs went to help her, and she bit one of them quite seriously, and so they sued her for $2 million, and apparently that, Mike, is not enough to get the sack from CNN. It is an amazing corporation. You can't get fired. It reminds me a lot of government these days. Whatever you do, it's impossible to get fired.
Yep, okay. And well, let's bring in Nick Parker at this point, because here we are. Blitz, RAF Tornado GR4, and the article says RAF warplanes spearheaded a 105 missile blitz that wiped out Syrian tyrant Assad's chemical weapons centres in 2 minutes yesterday. Our jets flew from a base in Cyprus, and British tourists there were on alert for an airlift out last night after potential revenge attacks.
Yes, revenge attacks from Russia or Syria, as if they would be hitting Cyprus. But that's par for the course for this paragon of journalistic integrity, the Sun newspaper. Here's the hard copy there, right next to Lily Allen, of course, just to keep the seriousness of the situation intact. But that was the foreign correspondent for the Sun, and his name is Nick Parker. He's interesting, Mike. This is the same Nick Parker that was convicted and actually jailed for various indiscretions. I think the main thing he was convicted for was handling a stolen mobile phone from MP Siobhan McDonough. And he did, I don't know how long he did, but 6 months or something like this. And then he was hired back with the Sun after that.
And the Guardian thinks it was a great idea to hire him back.
The Guardian applauded the Sun for hiring him back, saying that this is good for any future employees of newspapers, if they do find themselves getting arrested or jailed, that they know that their job will be there for them when they come back. That was the rationale of the Guardian.
Because this is a bastion of journalistic integrity right here?
Well, apparently it is, yeah. So the Guardian and the Sun see eye to eye on that particular issue, which I thought was very interesting.
And so with that coverage of the weekend's events in mind, we put the media on trial once again. In Leeds on the 27th of May. Mediaontrial.uk for more information and tickets. Do get along to that if you possibly can, because it's more important and more needed than ever, Patrick.
It is, and we had Piers Robinson on the Sunday Wire last night. I encourage people to go to 21st Century Wire and listen to that interview, along with a fantastic segment with Vanessa Beeley live on the ground from Damascus on radio last night. And Piers Robinson really brought up a good point. He said that Media on Trial is a concept event, Mike. It was really a response, kind of an organic response to a need that seemed to be out there as people wanting to talk about what is the mainstream media's role in promoting these conflicts, in promoting war, in spinning the story in Syria. And there's a real public desire for a lot more, more of an in-depth conversation on this. And so that's what it is. It really came up out of just a kind of, I don't know, collective interest in wanting to talk more about this subject. So.
Absolutely. Now, just before we leave the issue of Syria, let's have a look at Peter Hitchens. Now, this in general, I have to say, is a pretty good piece. Patrick, it's entitled How on Earth Would Killing More People Rescue Syria? But Peter Hitchens, as we mentioned last night on the Sunday Wire, falls into this trap of using Trump language. Assad is a monster, he says on a number of occasions in the course of this otherwise good piece. But what is it amongst mainstream journalists, even those that are more aware than others, that causes them to fall into the same old rhetoric?
We talked about this last night with Piers Robinson on the Sunday Wire, and I will start off by saying Peter Hitchens has been a fantastic and a really much-needed voice from the mainstream media, a voice of reason, especially on not just the Novichok conspiracy, debacle, but also on this latest incident with Syria. Peter Hitchens has been phenomenal, and I tip my hat to him, and many people salute him for his bravery of sort of coming out and being a leader in thought on this issue. However, he, like many other mainstream pundits who are afraid to kind of go a step completely over the line, he still believes that Assad is a monster and stated that in his article. And my question to Peter Hitchens was on Twitter, I said, well, thank you for the article, Peter, but I'll contend that your assumption that Assad is a monster, where are you getting that information? Could it not be from the same propaganda machine that is currently spinning up this drive for war right now, and who promoted this latest illegal international act of aggression by the US, the UK, and France? So is it coming from the same source, this idea? So how do we, and Piers Robinson did a beautiful job of articulating this in our interview last night. So how do people come up with this characterization of these leaders to be targeted, to be demonized? And usually it's in the run-up, Mike, to some sort of military action. We need to convince our public in the West to dislike and to even hate and fear these foreign characters in order to sort of justify in the court of public opinion that a military intervention is probably okay on balance. Certainly Tony Blair has hung his whole campaign against Iraq on that very talking point.
And we'll just end with this one from Kevork Almassian, Marine Karaoke Bar in Damascus.
This is Kevork Almassian, who's known for his dry sense of humor, but in this case, he's spot on. This is a cake here. If you take a look at this, that's a special cake celebrating the US-UK perfect strike on Syria. As you can see, all the cruise missiles that have been downed there, and if you look on social media, you'll see children sitting on the intact bodies of the UK and Shadow Storm. I don't know if it was the Shadow Storm or the cruise missiles, but sitting and playing on these perfectly intact missiles from the West that apparently were taken down either by electronic jamming or 1970s Soviet-era Syrian air defense. So what a beautiful cake that is. I'm sure they'll have a good time eating that.
Absolutely. Right, quick advertisement, AV9, Friday the 4th to the 7th of May, Howard House Hotel near Milton Keynes. All the rooms are gone now. There are some day tickets available. Do get along to that if you possibly can. And I also want to mention the Dying for Good Health conference on the NHS taking place in the Albert Hall in Nottingham on the 12th of May. Tickets are available through the UK Column website for that. A fantastic range of speakers, details on the UK Column website. Get to that one. It is a unique event. And there will be more of those coming. Now, let's get on to the Skripal affair, Patrick, because, well, Sergey Lavrov over the weekend really making a pretty definitive statement about what the nature of this chemical, this toxic chemical that was used was. He spoke to the Assembly of the Council of Foreign and Defence Policy. He said that a Swiss lab, Spiez, had determined that BZ was in fact the poison used against the Skripals, and that it was only ever been manufactured or used by the US and Britain and other NATO states, but not Russia. He said that the OPCW sent samples of this toxin that they had received from the British authorities to the Swiss state lab, and that was one of the internationally recognised centres of excellence that the OPCW authorises to conduct such tests. And he said the laboratory where I'm convinced professional scientists work, who value their reputation, made the following conclusions. Now I'm going to cite the document. The analysis of the samples uncovered traces of the toxic chemical BZ and its precursors falling into the second category of chemical weapons under the Chemical Weapons Convention. Now the key point here, Patrick, is that for some reason or for whatever reason, the OPCW released a press release last week, which we featured on this programme, and we understand that they also released a secret document because the press release, the publicly available press release, did not include any kind of chemical breakdown of the material that was given to them by the British. But what it did say was that they concur with the British identification, but they didn't identify what the British had said. So we didn't know whether what the private briefing between the Porton Down staff and the technical staff of the OPCW was. And now we seem to have some evidence from Lavrov as to what it was. But the problem is that to date, the OPCW will not make any public statement about what they discovered in these labs, including the Swiss lab. So Lavrov, who's obviously seen the secret document, which includes the chemical breakdown, has made that public. Obviously, the British government knows what's in those documents as well. So far, I haven't seen any British rebuttal of this statement from Lavrov. It seems to be a situation of complete silence.
It's really important because, as Lavrov pointed out, the BZ toxic compound, which explains the Skripals looking out of it stoned with their the white eyeballs, according to some of the witnesses at the time. There's only 2 countries, Mike, that developed that, and those are the UK and the United States. And on record, if you want to talk about these so-called Novichok class of nerve agents, there's many countries that have developed or done experiments with this for the purpose of studying it. But one of the only countries that's actually done it fully is the United States. And coincidentally, they deleted that from the database years ago. But they did develop that in 1998, the Edgewood Proving Grounds in Maryland, at the U.S. Army's Research and Development Lab for Biological and Chemical Weapons in 1998. That's on record. However, they deleted it from the NIST list. I wonder why they deleted it. Did they possibly have any idea that this situation might be coming up in the future? Who knows?
Who knows? Who knows? Okay, look, Pat, we'll leave it there for today. Thank you very much for joining me. Thank you for joining me.
And I just want to say one thing. 21st Century Wire, as you mentioned last week, came under a distributor denial of service attack, which began on last Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And 5 days, our website was offline. We kept getting hit and attacked. We couldn't deal with it. But I want to thank all of the listeners and readers of 21st Century Wire, and some of those are UK column supporters, for helping us last week that literally helped us to support us, and we managed to get our site up partly, Mike, because of the support of readers and listeners of this show and 21st Century Wire. And I can't thank everybody enough. We're back online now, thanks to you guys, so thank you very much.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Thank you, Pat. Thank you for watching. We will be back at the same time tomorrow, 1 p.m. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.